Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vidyasagar from the Indian Institute of Technology, Hyderabad. And this is the tutorial lecture, Recent Advances in Reinforcement Learning. The title is just a little bit different from what I had originally proposed, but the talk corresponds very closely to what is in the proceedings. So, reinforcement learning is an active area of research and it combines ideas of exploration, which is gaining new knowledge, and exploitation, which is taking advantage of knowledge already gained. And obviously, there is always a trade off between the two. There are many possible mathematical models for reinforcement learning, but in this talk, I'm going to focus on just one model, which is known as Markov decision processes, or MDP for short, with unknown parameters. So we will start with a review of Markov decision processes. So a precursor to Markov decision processes are something known as Markov reward processes. So what are they? Suppose you have a finite set, which I'll call X, with n elements, and I'll call this as the state space. And you have a stationary stochastic process, X of t, assuming values in this finite set X. Then we will call this stationary stochastic process a Markov process if it has the following property. For every time t and every state x sub I, the conditional probability that x of t equals x sub I, given the entire past history of the stochastic process, is exactly the same as the conditional probability that x of t equals x sub I, given only the previous state x of t minus 1. So here the symbol x of 0, t minus 1 indicates the entire past history of the process. So the idea of a Markov process is that the conditional probability distribution of the current state depends only on the immediately previous state x of t minus 1. If you are told xt minus 2 all the way through x of 0, you don't get any more information. For a stationary Markov process, a key entity is the so-called state transition matrix, which is defined as follows. A sub ij is the probability that x at time t plus 1 equals x of j, given that at time t, x is equal to x sub I. So the ith row of this matrix A is just the probability distribution of x of t plus 1 when x of t equals x sub I. Now you should be careful to note that some authors define it differently. They define the ith column as the conditional probability and not the ith row. So long as you're consistent, it doesn't matter. The way I have defined it, this property holds. If I multiply A by a column vector of all ones, the answer is again the column vector of all ones. That is to say, each row of A sums up to 1. Once I specify A, and once I specify the probability distribution of the initial state x of 0, this completely determines the Markov process. Now, what is a Markov reward process? So the idea is that you have a Markov process, but on top of that, you also have a reward function, which gives you, for each state, a corresponding real number, which is called the reward. And we also choose what is called a discount factor, which I denote by gamma. And the idea is that gamma is between 0 and 1. Please note that I have specifically excluded gamma equals 1. So gamma is strictly less than 1. So given any realization of this Markov process, starting at some initial state x sub I, what I do is to calculate the future discounted reward. So R of x of t is the reward at time t, but it is discounted by this factor gamma of t. And all of this is conditioned on the initial state being x sub I. So you take the expected value, and that is called the expected discounted future reward. Whenever we say an infinite sum, the first question we should ask is, does the summation make sense? And the answer is yes, because R of x of t is bounded by some finite number, because x is a finite set and gamma, of course, is less than 1. So this summation is definitely finite. So we can ask, how can we compute v of xi for each state? So here's a quick way of doing it. You define a vector v consisting of all the rewards depending on the initial state being x1 through x sub n. And then similarly, you define this vector r, which is the vector of rewards corresponding to x1 through x sub n. Then it can be shown that v satisfies this implicit relationship, v is equal to r plus gamma av. How does this help us to compute v? Well, if you use the Gershgorin circle theorem, you can show that the spectral radius of A is 1. So the spectral radius of gamma A is gamma, which is less than 1, which means that I minus gamma A is non-singular. So we could solve that equation and write this. The problem is that if n is very large, which it often is in Markov decision processes, trying to do this inversion is not very efficient. So instead, what we do is we observe that if we put the L infinity norm on R sub n, then the induced norm of the matrix A is 1. So if I take a vector Z and map it into R plus gamma AZ, this is a contraction. Consequently, by the contraction mapping theorem, I can take any initial vector Z0 and keep applying this map. And if I do that, eventually, the iterations will converge to a fixed point of this map. But then the fixed point of this map is precisely the value vector v that we're trying to find. So gamma is the contraction constant. So the faster we discount future rewards, the faster these iterations will converge. So let's talk about Markov decision processes now that we have understood what is a Markov reward process. In the case of a Markov process, reward or not, the state evolves on its own. But in a Markov decision process, there is another variable which we call u, which I denote as action, and script u is the set of actions. And depending on what the action is, the dynamics of the Markov process get affected. So in particular, for each choice of u, there is a corresponding state transition matrix A of u, and it is defined in the familiar way. It's the probability that xt plus 1 equals x sub j, given that xt equals x sub I, but with one more extra conditioning, which is that the action, the action at time t equals u. Similarly, the reward function also depends on both the current state and the action taken. So R maps x cross u into R, whereas earlier it used to map only x into R. Now, the most important concept in Markov decision processes is known as a policy. There are two kinds of policies, deterministic and probabilistic. I will denote deterministic policies by pi of d and probabilistic by pi of p. So deterministic policy is just a map from x into u. All it says is, if the current state is this, the action is this. So pi is the policy, then pi of x is just the corresponding action. On the other hand, a probabilistic policy maps each state into a probability distribution on the action space. So if pi is in this set pi of p and x is the current state, then pi of x belongs to the simplex on u. Notice that the number of deterministic policies is the cardinality of u raised to the power of the cardinality of x. It's a finite number, though it could be enormous, but pi sub p is uncountable. So usually in Markov decision processes, we don't pay a whole lot of attention to pi of p and instead restrict it to deterministic policies. The next important point to note is that every policy applied to a Markov process gives you another Markov process. How does it do that? Well, if pi is in pi of d, and you apply that policy and the current state is x sub I, what's the likelihood that you are going to be in x sub j at the next time instant? It's just the state transition matrix Aij corresponding to the action pi of xi. And you can verify that even though it looks like this is changing with time, it is actually a stationary Markov process. Okay. Similarly, if pi is a probabilistic um, policy, and it is this probability distribution pi x of 1 through pi x of m, then all you have to do is to take each one of these action-dependent Markov processes and then average them according to these probability densities. And once again, it can be shown that this is a Markov process. So what happens to the reward function? Remember that R maps x cross u into R. And once you have a policy, you define the corresponding reward map R of P. And the same standard way. If pi is the policy, you just take, if the current state is x of I, you take x of I for the state, pi xi to be the action, and compute R. Whereas if it is a probabilistic policy, you just simply average R of xiu over all possible u's, weighted by the probabilistic policy pi. So hereafter, we're going to use the symbols A of pi for the state transition matrix and R sub pi for the reward corresponding to a policy. So in a Markov decision process, we actually like to ask three questions, and they're in increasing order of difficulty. First one is, given a policy, what is the corresponding value? Second one is, amongst all possible deterministic policies, which one gives us the highest value for a given initial state? And we don't generally spend much effort on probabilistic policies. And the third one is, okay, fine, we know what is the maximum value we can get from a given initial state. Now tell me what is the policy that will actually achieve that optimal value. So these are addressed in the next slides. So if you have a policy pi, the corresponding value is given in the same way as before, namely the expected discounted future reward starting at a given initial state, but now with the state transition matrix A of pi and the reward function R of pi. So we will call this V pi of x of I. And how do we compute this? Well, not much different from the way we did earlier. We just define this vector V of pi to be the corresponding values for each initial state, and the reward vector to be the corresponding R's. And as before, we get the same equation as we had earlier. And because the spectral radius of gamma A pi is gamma, which is less than 1, we just keep applying the iteration that we have seen before. And the solution will converge to this true valuation. Now, the optimal value determination leads to one of the most profound ideas in Markov decision processes, and this is known as the Bellman equation. What the Bellman equation tells you is that the optimum value that can be achieved from a given initial state x of I satisfies this recursive relationship. So in other words, starting at x sub j, if you have the optimal valuation, and then that is weighted by the state transition matrix, and then the next state reward, and you maximize that over all possible actions you can take at time t equals 1, let us say, that has to equal V star of x of I. Now, this is sometimes called the principle of optimality. The reason is this is an implicit equation for V star. So it's a principle, but it doesn't help you to actually find V star. Okay? So what do we do next? Well, we've been doing iterations till now, so let's see if we can't do iterations to solve this equation as well. So you define a vector V star to be the optimal valuation for each of the possible initial states. Then we define what is known as a value update map. So for any given valuation vector, you just simply maximize over all possible actions. Now notice that T of V is fairly straightforward to compute because V is just some given vector. You just substitute in here and then maximize over U, and that gives you the T of V. So T maps vectors into vectors. Now the point is that as you keep iterating with this map T, no matter what the initial vector is, Tk to the V0 approaches the optimal valuation which were given here. Okay, so you can in principle come as close as you want to the solution of the Bellman equation in terms of the valuation, but how about the policies that give you the optimal valuation? So this one says simply that once you know what the optimal value is, the choice of the action that will achieve this maximum, sorry, that should be max, that is a max not min, that is in fact the optimal policy. So the idea is that we use the previous theorem to compute the optimal valuation and then use the second theorem to determine the optimal policy. So can we do any better than this? Well, there is something known as policy iteration, and here the idea is for any deterministic policy, we map a policy into another policy through this map which is called T of pi. And what T of pi does is it, well, you can read this formula probably more easily than I can, and what it does is this recursion, it sort of looks like an iteration on the valuation itself. And so for every V0, this sequence converges to the unique solution of this equation. So how do you take advantage of this? You take an initial policy pi 0, which you just guess, doesn't matter what it is. Then at iteration k, you solve this equation and then use this vector v pi of k, which I have found from here to update the policy. And here again the same mistake. This should be arg max, not arg min. So the above equation implies this. It's a bit abstract, but you can easily convince yourself that this is true. And then the main result in policy iteration says that as you keep applying these iterations, at every step, the valuation of the policy at time k plus 1 is component-wise larger than the valuation of the policy at time k. And since our objective is to maximize V by choosing the right policy, there is a finite integer k such that you get convergence to the optimal valuation in a finite amount of time. That's not necessarily as impressive a result as it sounds like, because the so-called finite amount of time can be a long, long time indeed, in the worst case. Ways to speed it up are one of the topics of current research. So now let's go to what is known as Q iteration. And Q iteration is a simplification of the task of computing the optimal value. In the Bellman equation, we tried to maximize this with respect to U. In the Q function, we don't do any such thing. So Q depends on both X and U. And then if we replace V of pi by the optimal valuation over all policies, then you get a function which is called Q star. So this is called the optimal Q function. And as it turns out, just as there is a Bellman equation for the valuation function V, there is also a Bellman equation for the optimal policy Q. The idea is that it's a bit easier to solve this implicit equation than it is to solve that implicit equation, and we'll see why this is so. But once you get Q star, finding the optimal policy is very straightforward. For each X, all you have to do is to pick the U that maximizes Q. That's it. So how do we find this? So we define this function f, which again looks somewhat similar. Now what this does is it takes functions q of x and w to other functions of x and w. And it turns out that this function is monotone, and it is also a contraction. Therefore, for every initial guess q0, a function of state and action, this sequence actually converges to the optimal q function. And once we know the optimal q function, you can get the optimal policy by the equation we have seen earlier. So what are some recent advances? So a couple of recent advances. One is called empirical dynamic programming. The idea here in empirical dynamic programming is to observe that this summation is really just an expected value. If you are in state x sub j at time t, and you apply the action u, then this is the probability of the next state. So this summation is just the expected value of v at the next state, conditioned on the current state and u. So we can rewrite the Bellman equation operator t as max over u of r plus the expected value. Okay. So why do we want to do that? Well, the advantage is, if you want to do this computation, you have to sum over all possible states. And if n is a large number, this can be a very time-consuming operation. On the other hand, computing expected values approximately is a whole lot easier than doing these kinds of summations. And the reason is that, well, I'll come to that in a minute. So this formulation it's applicable even if x and u are infinite sets, but we're not going to go there. But the real advantage is the third bullet here, which is that you can replace an expected value by an empirical average. So in other words, if you start the Markov process at a given initial state and let it evolve over a few samples, then you just simply average the valuation over those samples, and that gives you a decent enough approximation of the expected value. So even though this quantity and that quantity are the same, this quantity is a lot easier to approximate, whereas there you have no option but to basically just do the summation. So when you replace the expected value by its empirical average, this is known as empirical dynamic programming. So in the paper, I have given some examples of empirical dynamic programming, but due to paucity of time, I am not going to discuss them here. Now I come to one of the more interesting ideas of recent times, known as ZAP Q-learning. And this again goes back to the same old equation, the Bellman equation. Q of xiu equals r xiu plus this summation. Now what is Q? Q maps the state space x times the action space u into real numbers. So what is the size of this set? The size of this set is the cardinality of the state space multiplied by the cardinality of the action space. And what Q star does is it assigns one real number to each one element here. So you can think about Q star as a vector of dimension cardinality of x times cardinality of u. So instead of trying to find this humongous dimensional vector, what we will do is we'll find a bunch of basis functions, C sub L, and the number of these basis functions is D. The key, of course, is that D has to be much, much smaller than the dimension of the vector Q star. So we fix these basis functions. We have no freedom on those. You try to choose them cleverly, but having done that, you approximate Q by a linear combination of these basis functions. And you don't choose C, you just simply adjust the weights. So now, what is the Bellman equation? It says this is equal to that. So you can write this as 0 is equal to minus Q star plus this. So that's exactly what we do. We put minus q plus r plus the same quantity as we have seen before, and this we call as the Bellman error. And if the Bellman error is 0 for a particular choice of theta, then we've solved the problem because we have found a solution. In general, we're not going to be able to do that. Why? Because we restricted q to be a linear combination of these basis functions, and the number of basis functions is far smaller than the dimension of the vector q. So you can't necessarily hope to make b theta 0, but you try to get close. Okay? So the approach is we use something called the Robbins-Monroe stochastic approximation method. It's a very old method, but nothing better has been found in nearly 50 years, I guess, nearly 60 years. And it's a method for finding a 0 of a function if all you have available are noisy measurements of this function. You can look it up, but anyway, basic idea is that you have two vectors. One is alpha sub t, and it looks like 1 over t plus 1. So what's special about 1 over t plus 1? This is a divergent summation. Then you have a second sequence, beta of t, which looks like 1 over t plus 1 raised to the power of rho, and rho is between 0.5 and 1. And because it is less than 1, this is summable. Okay? There are more general choices possible, but this is good enough to illustrate this. So what we do here is that we define this error beta. Let me just remind, this beta had no subscript. There is no time here. Here there is a time index t plus 1. So what we do is, there is this fairly messy looking bunch of equations. Don't want to waste a lot of time going through them, but the key equation is the first one. You are updating the parameter theta from time t to time t plus 1. And the update depends on this quantity phi, which is the maximizer of q at time t. And you sort of look at this formula, there's a phi right there. So in some very complicated and indirect way, this phi leads to the update of theta. Okay. So what can you say about it? The main result in this area, due to Aditya Devraj and Sean Mine, theorem 2.2 of their NIPS 2017 paper says that the sequence q of theta of t converges almost surely, sorry, L is missing there, almost surely to q star. Moreover, the resulting asymptotic covariance is optimal. Okay, so this last bit is the most important. So there are lots of ways of doing this, but this particular way of doing it is covariance optimal. So what are the conclusions? Reinforcement learning is an active area of current research, and viewing reinforcement learning as a Markov decision process with unknown parameters is just one possible approach. But other approaches are also worth studying, and I would say we have just barely begun to scratch the surface of this very exciting area. So thank you.